Welcome to the Vegas Insider channel here on YouTube. It's time for the Monday live stream for February 22nd, 2021. I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you had a good weekend from a betting perspective as we head into a new week and towards the end of February. First, we'll begin with the NBA, and we'll look back at what we saw on Sunday. And let's begin with the meltdown in the Big Easy. The Boston Celtics up 24 at New Orleans, and they end up losing to the Pelicans 120 to 115. Celtics closed as 2.5-point favorites. Game went over thanks to overtime. But let's first go with the Celtics and just how inconsistent they have been of late. They have not picked up back-to-back wins since late January against Cleveland and Chicago. And when you look back at what they've done recently, split with Atlanta, good home win against Denver, but also losing on the road to Washington, losing a couple towards the end of their road trip at Phoenix and at Utah. And the Celtics just really have failed to find a lot of consistency right now. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Pelicans, this was a team that fell apart in the fourth quarter of Friday's game against Phoenix, that they were up going to the fourth and the Suns totally steamrolled them in the fourth quarter and won by 18. So the Pelicans off back-to-back home losses to Portland and Phoenix, down 24 to Boston. They come back and win that game, and now you have a revenge game against Detroit coming up on Wednesday. But for New Orleans, really good win for Stan Van Gundy's team. But if you still look at this stretch here, 2-5 the last 7 games. They really have not played well, and look at all the overs that have cashed during this span. But they still have been a pretty good home dog, notwithstanding this Phoenix loss. So the Pelicans, nice bounce back and able to pull off the victory over the Celtics. Toronto was down early to Philadelphia, and they beat the 76ers 110-103. And a good second half there for the Raptors. That's now 4 straight wins for Toronto. And they beat Milwaukee twice this past week. They came back in that Minnesota game. That was kind of an odd game. That was the one you saw the highlight of Anthony Edwards dunking on the baseline. Great dunk, but he was 3 of 14 shooting in the game. And Minnesota actually came back and took the lead late in that game. And then Toronto went on like a 7-0 run, 9-0 run towards the end of that game to win it 86-81. And they got revenge for that 116-112 loss to the Timberwolves back a few days earlier. And now the Raptors, with a pair of games against the 76ers, they win the first one, 110-103. They get them again tomorrow. And coming up, Toronto has this stretch now after a bad start to the season. At Miami, winnable game. Houston, Chicago, Detroit at home, all winnable. Even at Boston, who's been very up and down. They just lost to Boston. But the Raptors playing much better right now. Orlando also playing well. They've won 3 straight at home. They beat Detroit 105-96. They were in control of this whole game against the Pistons. And Detroit off a couple losses on the road at Chicago, where they blew a 25-point lead, at Memphis that they lost a few nights ago. But Orlando, in spite of a couple injuries to key players with Aaron Gordon and Cole Anthony out, that they win this game 105-96. Orlando still remains a pretty consistent team against teams with losing records. The first time they beat a team with a winning record this year was Golden State on Friday, and that was the game that Orlando was up big in the first half. Golden State took a 10, 13-point lead in the fourth quarter, and then the Magic came back and beat them. So at least for the Magic, which is, you say letdown spot, off back-to-back underdog wins against the Knicks and Warriors. Now you're favored against Detroit, the first of 2 meetings with them. That was a good win for the Magic, as they're a team still trying. I hate using that term because everyone's trying, but Orlando could have packed it in with all the injuries they've had, but still they're playing all right. They are. I don't think they're going to win the Southeast Division title anytime soon, but at least they're playing all right. Oklahoma City beats Cleveland last night, 117-101. Check out the Cavs. This was a team that beat Brooklyn back in late January twice. Look at this run. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 straight losses. Last time they covered a game was January 27th. So 13 consecutive ATS defeats for Cleveland. So if you faded Cleveland 13 straight times, you won every time. And they lose to Oklahoma City last night. The Thunder had gone on an 0-3 ATS run before they came back and beat Cleveland last night. And you see what the Thunder has ahead of them. Not easy at home. Heat, Spurs, Hawks, and Nuggets. The Knicks beat the Timberwolves. That game went back and forth in the fourth quarter. You see New York was up by double digits at the half, up comfortably going to the fourth. Minnesota took the lead late, and then New York ended up winning. When's the last time you saw this? The Knicks, the Thunder, and the Magic, and granted, OKC was a playoff team for a while before they've lost all their parts. But those three favorites all winning and covering in the same night, very odd to see. But Minnesota, this team also, I mean, you look at this run here. On an 0-4 ATS stretch, they blew this Toronto game late. I mean, we just know Minnesota's not a good team. But when you look at the Knicks and to see how they have played, lose this game to Orlando, they won 4 or 5. Tibbs is doing as best as he can with this team. You know, and Golden State, Sacramento, you know, they got a shot to win those. They already beat Golden State on the road this season. Atlanta came back to knock off Denver. Nuggets have struggled on this road trip. But for the Nuggets now, that's, I mean, when you look at the home record, starting here at the Brooklyn game, 0-4, 1-4, 1-5, 1-6, 2-6 their last 8 games. I mean, for Denver to lose that game, pretty inexcusable. But Trae Young had a good game for the Hawks. Another over for them. They're an over machine because they play no defense. But for the Hawks, or for the Nuggets rather, losing to Boston, who was without Kemba. Washington, who's actually played better of late. Beat Cleveland, who's terrible, and lost to Atlanta. What a terrible road trip for Denver. And when you look back now, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5, 1-6 the last 7 on the road for Denver. Now they get Portland and Washington home. They got 4 more on the road after that. So Denver not playing their best. Brooklyn over the Clippers last night, and the Nets finish off this road trip a perfect 5-0. They cover all 5 games. The last 3 as a dog. They were getting blown out of the Phoenix game. They came back and won. They beat the Lakers on Thursday and then knock off the Clippers last night. A game the Nets were in control of. Clippers came back late. You had that Kawhi offensive foul on Harden at the end. I saw a lot of people on Twitter really say, oh, that's how could you call that? I don't know if Harden just sold it, but Kawhi still pushed off. And if he pushed off, then it's an offensive foul. And look, I didn't have anybody in that game, so I'm not trying to make a convincing argument to say, oh, well, that was the right call because I had the Nets. I didn't have that game, and the Nets ended up winning that game 112-108. Last time they played, you had this over of 242.5. This time, 7.5-point drop on the total, and game easily stays under the total. But Brooklyn without Kevin Durant, and they're playing really well, and now look at your schedule coming up. I mean, Brooklyn can win 10 straight with what they have coming up. And for the Clippers, now, they beat the Jazz Friday. They lose to the Nets. They're still playing, obviously very well, but Kawhi Leonard and Paul George can only do so much. Simple as that. Now, Milwaukee, after they went on their little 5-game skid, they beat Oklahoma City Friday, laying 10.5. They beat Sacramento last night, laying 10. And you see the next few games, Milwaukee should sleepwalk through and win. Then they get the Clippers and Nuggets. But Milwaukee, wins are, when you've lost 5 straight, you don't care who you play. You got to win games. Sacramento, though, they went on an 8-game ATS hot streak. They're now on a 7-game skid. How's that happen with Luke Walton's team? They were laying 1.5 Saturday at Chicago. Harrison Barnes was hurt. Now they get Brooklyn coming up tomorrow. There'll be a heavy dog. That'll be an interesting spot for the Kings and the Nets. Because I mentioned before, the Nets should beat the Kings. But Brooklyn just beat Sacramento on the road, 136-125 back on February 15th right here. All right, as 4.5-point favorites, the Nets were. And now the Nets will be double-digit favorites at home. You're coming back from this long road swing, and Sacramento's lost 7 straight. So I if you're Brooklyn laying 12 or 13, which is very possible, I mean, do you look at Sacramento in that game? I'd say you look at them. If you take them, but you look at them. Now, tonight's NBA, you only have 6 games, and you start with, you got 2 games in Texas. They've had a lot of weather issues, but now it looks like the Rockets and Mavericks are back on track to play, and soon the Spurs will get back once they get their COVID stuff figured out. Chicago's at Houston. Chicago laying 1, and the Bulls have won 3 of their past 4 games. They're coming off this win over the Kings. They hung with the Sixers. They've been better on the road. Beat Indiana in overtime, beat Orlando, lost to Orlando, beat Charlotte, beat Dallas. So Chicago's actually fared pretty well on the road. Now you get Houston, who you say it's an advantage or not. We've seen in college basketball, these long layups have been bad. This was obviously not a COVID situation. This was the weather situation in Texas. But if you're the Rockets, you've had a couple extra days off. You've had now a 7-game skid. You're 1-6 ATS in that stretch. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world you've been off for a few days, because you talk about a loss of momentum with a long winning streak. But what about a long losing streak? At least now, getting a few days off, maybe reset yourself. The Rockets also in a revenge spot. They lost to the Bulls here 125-120 back on MLK night, and they closed a 2-point favorite. Now they're getting a point on at home against Chicago, who, again, Chicago's playing better. Zach LaVine has got great numbers, but, I mean, you're going to back the Bulls on the road here. The Grizzlies and the Mavericks from Dallas, and Dallas, they've been off since last Sunday when they lost to Portland. So they've had a little bit of time to stew over things. They have not been a good ATS team at home this year, the Mavericks. 0-1, they beat New Orleans here. 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 1-5, 1-6, 1-7, 1-8, 1-9, 1-10, 2-10, 3-10, 3-11. 3-11 against the spread for the Mavericks at home. One of them was an underdog cover against the Heat. Beat Orlando and beat New Orleans. So the Mavericks, who have been playing better, just not covering numbers, they get Memphis. They've not played Memphis yet this season. So it's been a while since these two Southwest Division teams have faced off. Memphis just got blown out by Phoenix on Saturday. 128-97. Oof. But look who Memphis has beaten recently. Detroit, Oklahoma City, Sacramento, Charlotte. They came back in that game. 2 good wins on the road at the Spurs. I'll give you that one. Philly and Phoenix. I think Embiid was out of this game for Philly. One of those. I think Embiid was out of that one. And then they get Phoenix, which they held off there on MLK Day. But they haven't been a lot of good teams recently, Memphis. So now you're going on the road to Dallas, and the Mavs are favored, laying 5.5. The Heat and Thunder, when you think back, they were in the finals in, 2011? Was it 11, right? 11 or 12? And you had in that game, you had LeBron, Wade, Bosh, Russell Westbrook, Durant, Harden, all of them gone. So it's not exactly the same arsenals that are out there. But the Heat wrap up this really long road trip. Beat Sacramento after losing to Golden State in overtime. Won at the Lakers in an NBA Finals rematch. They held the Lakers 94 points. Yeah, I give them that. I know no AD for the Lakers, but still. They went out to LA and they beat the Lakers after they lost to the Clippers a few days earlier, laying 6. And that was without Kawhi and Paul George. But now they get Oklahoma City, who they beat convincingly back at home. January 4th, 118-90, that the Heat beat the Thunder. And OKC was on this 3-game skid before they won at Cleveland last night. And now they are back at home where it's just so up and down. 3-3 the last 6. And in some of those games, look, they're getting 7 to Brooklyn, lose by 22, getting 5 to Houston, lost by 30. They were getting 6.5, and they beat Houston the next night. Did upset Milwaukee. The Portland game was kind of wacky because they were down 24. They took the lead late, and then Portland went on a huge run at the end. So the Heat laying 6.5 Here's the showcase game tonight. Phoenix and Portland. And Phoenix, off these 2 blowout wins, they were down going to the fourth quarter in New Orleans, and they came back. And I want to get the exact number for you. They outscored the Pelicans in the fourth quarter 41-12. How insane is that? They're down. Look at this. New Orleans scores 34, 32, 36, and then they hold them to 12 in the fourth quarter. And then the next night, so 41-12. Let's do a little bit of math here. 28-15, 37-19. Look at what they did in those 3 quarters against New Orleans and Memphis. Just the job defensively and offensively. I don't know if we've had 3 more dominant quarters in the NBA in a row this season. But the Phoenix Suns, I think, will take that crown. So now they're back at home. They get Portland. Now, first of all, Phoenix is 19-10. Phoenix has covered the spread in all 19 of their wins. So they, and granted, probably a lot shorter spreads than we've seen. The big one was Orlando laying 11.5 when the Magic had a lot of guys out last Sunday. And this Brooklyn game, they were up 24 and lost. But when they win, they cover the Suns. And they played well at home. When you look at what they've done lately, Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, winning all these games. So the Suns get Portland. And Portland, I don't know what happened here, losing to Washington 118-111. And Washington's won 4 straight. We'll get to them in a second because they play the Lakers tonight. But Portland was up at the end of the first quarter Saturday. Let's go back to that game really fast. So Saturday, they're up 43-31 against Washington. Okay, you're in control. You got to score 30-12. But look how these quarters went. Portland plus 12, Washington plus 18, Portland plus 9, Washington plus 10. So very up and down game, but the Wizards end up winning and beating the Blazers on Saturday night as a short underdog. So Portland now goes to Phoenix, where they've won 3 straight on the road, at Dallas, at OKC, at New Orleans. And this is not an easy trip for the Blazers. Denver and the Lakers up ahead. These 3 at home, you would think the Blazers would win, or at least take 2 of 3. But I want to point this one out too. I noted earlier in the season that the Blazers have been good off a loss, okay? So let's look back. 1, 2, 3. They covered here against the Rockets, so we'll say 4-0 ATS. 4-1, but they got the win over the Knicks. Another win over the Hawks here. And going all the way back here is last time they lost consecutive games early January. Okay? But let's look and see who they beat. Orlando, Washington, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Minnesota, Golden State, where they weren't playing well at the beginning, and Houston, when Harden was there and they had all the issues, they won that game in overtime. The point is that a lot of teams that they beat, Portland, when they're off a loss, were losing teams. They bounced back and played well. Now you're playing a team with a winning record, and it's probably one of the top 5 teams in the Western Conference right now. I don't think that's crazy to say. So now it's curious to see what Portland does against a team that's quality. Charlotte and Utah, the Gordon Hayward return to Salt Lake City. The Hornets held off the Warriors in that crazy finish the other night, 102-100. And you see Charlotte's been very up and down. And now they hit the road. Look at this long road swing they got. And they're getting a lot of points here at Utah. They got 10 at Toronto earlier this year and covered. They got 10 at Philly, lost by 15. Got 11 at home against Brooklyn and won. So they've been pretty decent as a heavy dog this year. Now you get Utah, who is off their second loss in the last 22 games, losing to the Clippers on Friday night. And the Jazz, the last time they lost at home was to Phoenix last calendar year, December 31st. So 2021, Utah has not lost a game at home. And they have been blowing out opponents at home. They've won a lot of these games by double digits. So tread lightly there with the Hornets going to Utah. The final game, Washington going out to L.A. Wizards face the Lakers. And first for the Lakers, they've been terrible against the spread at home this whole year. Now they're not winning games at home, losing to Brooklyn and losing to Miami. But 1-4, 1-5, 2-5, 2-6 ATS the last 8 for the Lakers at Staples. And they only scored 94. You see what happens when Anthony Davis isn't there. LeBron can only do so much. But Washington, all of a sudden, now you got Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook going out to L.A., first of back-to-back games at Staples Center. They get the Clippers tomorrow. Not an easy road trip for Washington, but got to give them credit, though. They've won 4 straight. And look who they've beaten. I mean, Portland, Denver, Houston's not really good right now. Boston's struggling, but still a playoff team. That's a good little stretch there for the Wizards, who had been terrible for most of the season. They won that Brooklyn game at the end a few weeks ago. So give Washington a little bit of credit, just a little bit. Now let's look back at Sunday in college basketball before we get to Monday, because Monday there's not a lot of games tonight, so that'll be pretty fast. But on Sunday, this is the big boy here in the Big Ten. Michigan beats Ohio State 92-87 in Columbus. Look at Juwan Howard's team. 1 loss this year to Minnesota. They had a 3-week stretch of being off due to COVID stuff. Beat Wisconsin, beat Rutgers, beat Ohio State. They get Indiana next, and Indiana's been a bit of a disaster of late. You still got to get 2 with Michigan State, even though Michigan State's down. Illinois and Iowa will be very tough at home for the Wolverines, but that's a good job there for Juwan Howard. And Ohio State, they suffer their 5th Big Ten loss of the season, and they had their winning streak snapped. They last lost at home to Purdue back on January 19th. So this is a team, the Buckeyes, that they played well on the road, and they got Michigan State coming up, and then Iowa and Illinois, so not easy for them either. But beat Indiana here, beat Michigan State, but a couple of their losses recently coming at home for Ohio State. Houston ends up routing Cincinnati 90-52, and Houston went, I think what was the number? It was like 55-11 run they went on against Cincinnati after they just lost to Wichita State. So that's a good job there by Kelvin Sampson's team. And you see here, they got Western Kentucky in a makeshift scheduled game coming up on Thursday because Western Kentucky wants to help out its tournament cause. And hey, why not? Play Houston, see what you can do. Might as well at this point. But Houston ends up beating up Cincinnati in that one. Also, USF knocked off Temple. Temple's really struggled of late. Maryland over Rutgers. That was a revenge spot for the Terrapins. They lost at home to Rutgers. Maryland, a very odd team to figure out. They lost at home way back in December by 14 to Rutgers. Now they've won 4 straight. They beat Nebraska a few times, and they knocked off Minnesota. They won at Minnesota. They won at Illinois. They won at Wisconsin. So, yeah, and this game against Clemson, they were just decked from the beginning. And coming up for Maryland, if they want to make a run, that's not a terrible ending for them. Michigan State, Northwestern, Penn State, that is not that bad. So I think that Maryland, if they want to make any kind of run towards the tournament, I don't know, it could be too late, they can make that run now. Iowa held off Penn State. Penn State was down early in that game, like something 11-2 or one of those things, and Penn State came back, took a 5-point lead at the half, was up 7 early in the second half. Iowa actually went up by 9, 10, and Penn State came back and got the cover, a 6-point, or got the cover in a 6-point loss as 10.5-point underdog. So that's a good job there for Penn State. And for Iowa, it just seemed like this was the letdown spot. Ohio State and Michigan on the road on deck. They just won at Michigan State and beat Wisconsin. So now, not that you're not getting up for Penn State, but it just was an inflated total, or inflated side, I should say, for that game. It stays under the total of 157. Wisconsin wins at Northwestern. That was a big bounce back for the Badgers, as they had lost their previous 2 games to Michigan and Iowa at home. So now they're laying 6 at Northwestern. They won convincingly. Now your prize is you get Illinois. I get Illinois, Purdue, and Iowa. So that's not easy for Wisconsin. Xavier beat Butler 63-51. That game was a lot closer than the final indicated. Butler was without 3 of their top players, but Butler hung around, and they just couldn't get the cover against Xavier. And Butler is really, they're down this year, so there's really no surprise there. But they've lost 3 in a row. They're 0-3 against the spread in that stretch. So they're kind of playing it out. And who do you get? Seton Hall, Villanova, and Creighton to wrap things up. But Maybe you see some value in them as big underdogs in one of those games. Now, college basketball tonight, scanning the old card, Duke and Syracuse, the big Monday opener from Cameron Indoor Stadium on ESPN. And Duke has won 3 straight. This stretch here for Duke, where it looked like things had totally fallen apart for them, they played better. Won at NC State convincingly, won at Wake Forest convincingly, beat Virginia as a rare home underdog. And now you get Syracuse, Louisville, Georgia Tech, North Carolina. This is where we're going to see Duke's going to finish off the season winning 7 straight. Possible. It's not crazy to think. And they get Syracuse coming up tonight. Syracuse rallied from a huge deficit to beat Notre Dame on Saturday. So now Syracuse has won 3 in a row. And they go on the road for a couple games now this week against Duke and Georgia Tech. You have the Pac-12, the very notable Monday night Pac-12 game. USC and Oregon out at the Galen Center in L.A. And USC had their long winning streak snapped by Arizona. Arizona really needed that win on Saturday. 81-72, the Wildcats beat the Trojans. So USC, who have been playing very well, their previous loss came at Oregon State as a huge favorite back in January. Now you get Oregon. Colorado's going to be very tough on the road. Utah is so all over the place. And then UCLA in a rivalry game. They blasted UCLA earlier in the season. Oregon, look at the way they've been playing. Very well. 5 straight wins. Won the last 2 on the road at Arizona State, at Arizona. And their last road loss came at Colorado. So they've been playing very well on the road so far in Pac-12 play. And the Ducks, they have a revenge game at the end against Oregon State, but they could beat USC here. Stanford, up and down team. They should beat Cal on the road. So Oregon, they didn't cover in that game against Utah the other night, but they're still playing extremely well. The final game we'll look at in college basketball, the Big 12, Texas Tech and Oklahoma State. And Texas Tech lost at Kansas Saturday. It's back-to-back losses now. Losing to West Virginia. That was the game Chris Beard got ejected. And you look back, the last game they won was back on February 6th at Kansas State. They didn't cover as heavy favorites. And they get Oklahoma State then Texas. So that's an interesting end there for the Red Raiders. And they did lose at home to Oklahoma State, 82-77 back in early January. And for the Cowboys, they have won 3 of 4. Granted, heavy favorites against K-State and Iowa State, the 2 worst teams in the conference. This is a good home win against Texas in overtime, 75-67. And also, they beat an Arkansas team that's on a great run in the SEC right now. And also beating Kansas at home. So they've had some good home wins this year, the Cowboys. Now we'll see what they do. And then they get Oklahoma twice to wrap it up before the conference tournament starts. Also, besides basketball, in golf, Max Homa wins the Genesis Invitational at 70-1 odds. So if you cashed on him, congratulations. The O'Reilly Auto Parts 253, in case you saw it or missed it, out in Daytona on the road course, which is always an adventure with all the accidents that you see. I guess we call them crashes, not accidents. But Christopher Bell was 50-1, and he ends up winning. So you've had Michael McDowell and Christopher Bell win the first 2 races of the NASCAR season. And Christopher Bell was a rookie last year. He had his ups and downs, but congratulations to him. And how about Joey Logano? It's now 2 straight weeks that Logano has led late and lost. But Chase Elliott was the big story, simply because, well, I guess from a gambling standpoint, simply because he was the favorite to win. And if you bet head-to-head matchups in NASCAR, Chase Elliott was a huge favorite in all 3 of his matchups. And that was against Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, and Ryan Blaney. And Chase Elliott lost all 3 of those head-to-head matchups. So you would have thought, oh, that's easy money. Chase Elliott normally does well, and he does. Both all the crashes on Sunday, things kind of got a little jumbled up. That Chase did not finish in the top 10. and he ended up losing all his head-to-head matchups. So that's something to look ahead to as we move forward. And the NASCAR circuit heads to Homestead on Sunday. So now you see Homestead at the end. Now it's Phoenix at the end. But they stay in Florida, and they go from Daytona down to Homestead, south of Miami, for the Dixie Vodka 400. Denny Hamlin won there last year. So, and there was a huge rain delay, because there's always rain delays in Florida. But, yeah, I mean, you want to look at heavy underdogs. Is that the way to go in NASCAR, or hope that some of these favorites come back? But so far, we've seen a lot of underdogs cashing in NASCAR. Let's take a quick look at the NHL before we head out of here. And there we go. Look at the scores. And tonight, you have Calgary and Toronto as those teams meeting up there at Scotiabank Place, right? 3 straight wins for the Maple Leafs. Now they get Calgary, who they've beaten twice already this season, and the Maple Leafs are minus 145 favorite. St. Louis and LA, they are hooking up, and you see what the Blues have done recently. They've been a little bit up and down, and they split a pair with LA back in late January. Both those games went over the total, and the Kings come in here to this matchup, winners of 4 in a row. So keep an eye on the Kings. Vegas and Colorado, at least they're not playing out. And did you watch that the other day? Did you happen to see the in Lake Tahoe? Beautiful scenery, but it's impossible to play when it's too warm out. And that was the case after one period. They had to stop things and then resume again at midnight Eastern. I mean, 9 o'clock out west, but I mean, the outdoor games, you have to play like in miserable weather, not in nice weather. And the Avalanche ended up beating the Golden Knights 3-2, and they have taken 2 of this 4-game set, if you want to call it, and they're back in Denver tonight to face the Golden Knights, and Avalanche are the Avalanche a favorite at home. Arizona and Anaheim, that's a 9 o'clock face-off from out in Arizona, and the Coyotes off back-to-back losses as heavy favorites to the Kings, as LA on fire. Both these games stayed under against Anaheim. Anaheim's the best under team in the league, so that total at 5 tonight. Oof. And all these games, make-up games in a sense, due to COVID issues. The Panthers and the Stars, they were supposed to play to start the season, and Dallas had COVID issues, and now they are playing. They were playing the 2 games in South Florida now, but they rearranged the schedule to play a 3rd game, so they're playing 3 games in 4 nights, and one of those is the makeup game from earlier in the season. And the Panthers off a loss at Detroit on Saturday, 2-1. That was their first regulation loss on the road, and now they got a bunch of games against Dallas moving forward, and they have not played each other so far this season. The Islanders and the Sabres out in New York, and the Isles off a pair of losses to Pittsburgh. They were held in check, only 3 goals in those games, but the Islanders did beat Buffalo this past week twice. So the Islanders with some success against the Sabres, and Buffalo just picked up a win against New Jersey, and they've had, they had a little bit of a layoff due to COVID issues. That was their first win since the end of January. Carolina and Tampa, the Hurricanes are in first place right now of the Central Division. They shut out Tampa Bay. They hadn't allowed a goal to Tampa Bay in 2 games this year. Outscored them 5-0 already. So that's pretty impressive for the Hurricanes. And then Minnesota and San Jose closed the night out west, and Minnesota off a pair of wins at Anaheim. And the San Jose Sharks, what they've done recently is just be up and down. Split the 2 games with St. Louis. They haven't won 2 games in a row this season. So do you fade San Jose? 0-1, 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, 0-5, 0-6 off a win for the Sharks. And they split the 2 games against Minnesota right here earlier this season. They had a ton of road games to start off. So that is, now look at this, what they're going to have coming up. A bunch of games at home. So that's the look at the NHL. And again, we appreciate you tuning into the Daily Insider. That's the name of the show, the Daily Insider, here on VegasInsider.com on our YouTube page. And in case you missed it or came in late, we have the replay. You can watch it any time. and get you prepared for Monday's action in the NBA and college basketball and the NHL. Once again, we thank you for watching, and we will talk to you again on Tuesday for the Daily Insider right here on VegasInsider.com.